The day had finally arrived. Lars picked up Anja from the spot where she usually spent her nights, near a church in the center of Utrecht. She wore a coat he had bought to shield her from the cold, but her hesitant demeanor remained. Despite all the help she had received, it was as if she were still bracing for something to go wrong. "Are you sure this is for me?" Anja asked softly as they walked toward the train station. "Absolutely. This is just the beginning, Anja," Lars replied with a reassuring smile. The train ride to Amsterdam was quiet but laden with meaning. Anja watched the landscapes rush past the window, her hands tightly clutching the jade pendant. It was hard for her to believe that, after years on the margins, someone was genuinely trying to help her. When they arrived at the small red brick building where the apartment was located, Lars stopped at the entrance and looked at her. "Ready?" Anja took a deep breath and nodded. The apartment was on the second floor, accessible by a narrow staircase. Lars opened the door, revealing a cozy space with white walls, a small living room featuring a grey sofa and wooden table, and a compact but functional kitchen. In the bedroom, a freshly made bed with floral sheets awaited her. On the living room table stood a vase of yellow tulips, a thoughtful touch Saskia had added at the last minute. "Is this mine?" Anja whispered, her eyes welling with tears as she took in the sight. "It's all yours," Lars replied, a weight lifting from his shoulders at her reaction. Anja moved slowly through the apartment, running her hands over the furniture as if to confirm it was real. The emotion was evident in her every gesture, though she tried to hold back her tears, maintaining the upright posture she seemed to use as a shield. "It's been so long," she murmured, turning to Lars. "So long since someone treated me with dignity. Everyone deserves that, Anja. You deserve this." In the following days, Lars and Saskia helped Anja settle into her new life. Saskia handled practical matters, such as enrolling her in social programs to secure basic income and medical support. Lars focused on personal touches. He brought groceries, helped Anja organize her new clothes, and encouraged her to rediscover small joys, like cooking and tending to plants on the windowsill. "It feels strange," Anja admitted one evening as she watered the tulips. "After so long with nothing, having a home again feels like a dream. And at the same time, a responsibility. A good responsibility, I hope," Lars joked from the sofa. Anja smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to light up her tired face. As the days passed, Anja began to change. She went from a guarded and wary woman to someone gradually opening up to the world again. Saskia noticed the transformation during one of her visits. "I don't think I've ever seen you smile this much, Anja," Saskia remarked as they sorted papers on the table. "It's hard not to smile when you have such good people around you," Anja replied simply. But something else was stirring. During a casual conversation, Anja began asking Lars about his mother's jade necklace. She seemed intrigued by the similarity between the two pieces and, though she avoided pressing him, it was clear she wanted to understand more about the connection. "My mother had one just like this," Lars said once again. "She always told me it came from a small town in the south. It was a family keepsake." "My mother said the same thing," Anja replied thoughtfully. The coincidence felt like more than chance, but Lars decided to leave that mystery for another time. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that fate had intertwined their stories in a way yet to be uncovered. For Lars, Anja's transformation was just the beginning of something greater. He felt that his actions could ripple outward, inspiring others. But for now, he was content seeing her safe, comfortable, and, above all, treated with dignity. As Lars closed the apartment door that night, he couldn't help but smile. He was certain Anja's journey was only beginning, and he was already envisioning the next step in their shared path. Anja's apartment had become a sanctuary, a symbol of resilience and hope, but Lars couldn't stop thinking about how many others like her were still trapped in cycles of invisibility and despair. Something had to be done, and he felt his mission was only beginning. The following morning, while walking through the park near Anja's apartment, Lars began to outline ideas in his mind. He recalled stories his mother used to tell about the importance of community, about how, in the small village where she grew up, no one was left behind. Those memories planted a seed. What if he could bring that philosophy to the modern city? Determined to act, Lars arranged a meeting with Saskia to discuss his idea. A community center? Saskia asked, intrigued, as she jotted down notes. Yes. A space where vulnerable people can receive support, meals, job training, everything they need to start over, Lars explained with enthusiasm. We could call it Zorg voor iedereen, care for everyone. Saskia smiled, impressed by Lars's passion. It's ambitious. You'll need resources, partnerships, and a lot of organization. I know. But we made a difference in Anja's life. Why not in others' lives too? In the days that followed, Lars threw himself into planning. He tapped into his network to pitch the idea to local business owners, including bakers, grocers, and restaurant owners. The response was mixed. Some, like Peter's neighboring baker, were enthusiastic, while others were skeptical or indifferent. It's not my responsibility to fix this, shrugged one supermarket owner. But Lars refused to give up. He realized he needed a compelling story to rally more support. During a meeting with local entrepreneurs, he decided to share Anja's story. He spoke about how he met her, her struggles, and the transformation that a single act of empathy had brought about. Anja isn't an isolated case, Lars said firmly. She represents thousands of people who just need a chance. And we, as a community, have the power to make a difference. The impact was immediate. Some business owners pledged donations, while others offered partnerships, such as providing food supplies for the center. Saskia, ever the organizer, began assembling a team for the project, including social workers, psychologists, and volunteers. Soon after, Lars found the perfect location for the community center, an old warehouse in the heart of Utrecht. Although it was in poor condition, it had potential. With the help of volunteers, renovations began. Anja, now healthier and more confident, insisted on helping. I can't just stand by and watch, she said, painting one of the walls. I want to give back for everything you've done for me. As the center took shape, news of the initiative began to spread. Local newspapers ran stories highlighting Anja's journey and Lars's work. Public interest grew, and more people began donating their time and resources. Finally, the grand opening day arrived. Zorg voor iedereen opened its doors with a simple but heartfelt community event. Lars gave a speech, speaking about the importance of solidarity and how small gestures could lead to significant changes. When he invited Anja to speak, the applause filled the warehouse. I wouldn't be here without the kindness of Lars and Saskia, Anja said, her voice thick with emotion. But this place isn't just about me. It's about everyone who needs a second chance. The following weeks were intense. The center became a hive of activity, offering free meals, clothing, and counseling sessions. Volunteers worked tirelessly to help participants reintegrate into society, teaching job skills and connecting them with employment opportunities. Inspired by Lars's story, local businesses began hiring directly from the center. But not everything was smooth. There were logistical challenges and occasional resistance from the community, including opposition from Peter, the bakery manager, who remained skeptical of the project. This won't last, he scoffed to a customer. Lars and his team, however, refused to be deterred. Every small victory strengthened their resolve. When Anja landed her first job at the center, helping organize events and cook meals for participants, Lars knew their efforts were making a real difference. One afternoon, Lars watched as Anja taught a simple recipe to a group of participants. The sight struck him deeply. It wasn't just about food or shelter, it was about restoring dignity, building connections, and creating a community where everyone felt seen and valued. This is just the beginning, Saskia said, walking up beside him. Lars smiled, his eyes fixed on the group. He knew she was right. Zorg voor iedereen was more than a center, it was a beacon of hope. Lars could see the potential for its impact to ripple far beyond Utrecht, inspiring similar initiatives elsewhere. As he stood there, watching the fruits of their labor come to life, he felt a profound sense of purpose. And though he knew challenges lay ahead, Lars was ready to face them. Together with Anja, Saskia, and a growing network of people who believed in the cause, he was determined to prove that when a community comes together, no one has to be left behind. Lars left the bakery with purposeful strides, Anja's image etched in his mind. Their conversation had not only moved him but also challenged him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to act, and quickly. For him, this wasn't just a random act of kindness, it was an opportunity to give back in a way life had subtly taught him to appreciate. That afternoon, he called Saskia, a longtime friend and social worker based in Amsterdam. They had met during a university community project, and Lars knew that if anyone could help bring his idea to life, it was her. "Saskia, I need your help with something unusual," Lars began over the phone. "Sounds intriguing." "Tell me more," replied Saskia, her voice carrying the practical energy she was known for. Lars detailed everything about Anja, their encounter at the bakery, her heartbreaking story, and his determination to get her off the streets. As he spoke, his resolve solidified further. Saskia listened intently, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions. "So, essentially, you want to find her a place to live and ensure she has the support she needs to start over," Saskia summarized. "Exactly. I want to do more than just hand her a meal. She deserves dignity, not charity." Saskia was silent for a moment, a sign Lars recognized as her analytical mind at work. "Okay, it's doable. But it won't be easy. Finding housing for homeless individuals is tricky, especially if they lack updated documents or basic medical support." "I know," Lars sighed. "But we'll figure it out. I'm prepared to cover whatever it takes." Saskia chuckled lightly. "You've always been like this, Lars. Here's the plan, I know some programs in Amsterdam that could help. But first, we need to talk to Anja and understand what she wants. There's no point in planning if she isn't willing to accept help." "Agreed. Can we meet her tomorrow?" "Sure. Come to my office at 10 a.m. The next morning, Lars and Anja met at the same bench where they had talked the previous day. This time, he was accompanied by Saskia, a vibrant and compassionate woman who quickly put Anja at ease. "So, Anja, Lars has told me a bit about your story. I work with people in similar situations, and I'd like to help you take the next step," Saskia said warmly. Anja, initially wary, slowly began to open up. She admitted she had never seriously considered leaving the streets, having faced rejection so often when seeking help. "I've lost count of how many doors have been slammed in my face," she said, her tired eyes still sharp. Saskia gently held Anja's hand. "The good news is, we're here to change that. But it'll take teamwork. Are you ready to try?" After a long silence, Anja nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." With that, the plan began to take shape. Saskia identified a small apartment available in Amsterdam through a subsidized housing program. Though modest, the space was inviting, and Lars immediately offered to fund basic furnishings and a few upgrades. "It's the least I can do," Lars said when Saskia commented on his generosity. Over the next few days, Saskia got to work arranging everything, securing Anja's documents, coordinating medical and psychosocial support, and navigating the bureaucratic hurdles. Meanwhile, Lars focused on the apartment, personally overseeing the setup to ensure it would be a welcoming space for Anja. Challenges cropped up at every turn, delays with paperwork, uncooperative vendors, and even Anja's own fears that this might be another false promise. Lars, however, remained steadfast. "I told you I'd help, Anja. And I'll keep that promise," he reassured her. Finally, after days of relentless effort, everything was ready. Lars stood in the small apartment, now furnished with simple yet comfortable items, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. "This is just the beginning," he said to himself, confident that the impact of this act would ripple far beyond Anja's life alone. Anja gazed at Lars with wary eyes, her fingers instinctively touching the jade pendant around her neck. For a moment, it seemed she wouldn't answer. The gesture was automatic, a way to shield something that clearly held deep meaning for her. "It was my mother's," she finally said, her voice faint, as though the words had been pulled from her soul. "It's all I have left of her." Lars kept his focus on the pendant, his mind racing to piece together a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. He was certain he'd seen an identical piece before, but where? Though curiosity burned within him, he decided not to push further. "Not yet." "It's beautiful," he said with a soft smile, steering the conversation elsewhere. "But tell me, how did you end up here? He gestured to the small space between them, subtly referencing her current struggles. Anya hesitated again, but Lars's kindness was beginning to dismantle the walls she had built over years of being disregarded. Slowly, she started to share fragments of her story, her voice wavering between sorrow and resignation. "I was a teacher, you know," she began, her eyes drifting to something beyond the bakery window, as if searching for glimpses of a distant past. "Many years ago, I had a house, a family, a normal life. But life has a way of taking everything from you." Lars listened in silence, absorbing each word. She recounted losing her job when the school she worked at shut down, the tragic death of her only child in an accident, and the debts that consumed her until she lost her home. With no one to turn to, she eventually ended up on the streets. "And now, it's just me." She exhaled a shaky sigh, trying to sound indifferent, but the pain was unmistakable. "You shouldn't be alone," Lars said, leaning forward, his expression sincere. "No one should be. Especially not after everything you've been through." Before Anya could respond, Peter, the manager, approached their table with purposeful steps. He held a cloth in one hand, his crumpled apron amplifying his irritation. "Lars, have you finished your charity act? Now, please, wrap it up and take her out. She's driving my customers away." Peter's tone made Lars's blood boil. He stood up slowly, his posture as unyielding as a stone wall. "Driving customers away? Or is it your humanity you've lost, Peter?" Lars replied, his voice low but brimming with indignation. Some customers stopped to watch the exchange, and the discomfort in the room thickened. Peter opened his mouth to retort, but Lars didn't give him the chance. "I saw what you did. You threw away perfectly good food just to humiliate someone who only wanted a bit of bread. Do you think that's acceptable?" Lars's voice rose slightly, now addressing the other customers as well. "This city was built on values of compassion and solidarity. Is this how we treat each other now?" Peter hesitated, glancing at the reproachful faces around him. He muttered something incomprehensible before retreating to the counter, pretending to busy himself with the bread display. Lars exhaled deeply, trying to release the anger that had consumed him. He sat back down, meeting Anya's bewildered gaze. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to make things worse," he said, his tone calmer now. "You didn't have to do that for me," Anya replied, her voice still uncertain. "Maybe I didn't. But I did," Lars shrugged, picking up the cup of coffee he'd ordered earlier. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because," he paused, carefully choosing his next words. "Because I feel like there's much more to your story than what you've shared." Anya didn't respond, but something in her expression shifted. For the first time in a long while, someone had looked at her and seen more than a homeless woman. Someone saw her as a human being. Lars knew this was only the beginning, but he also knew he couldn't simply walk away. Something deep within him insisted he stay, that this moment was the start of something far greater than either of them could yet understand. Seated at the small bakery table, Lars noticed that Anya's initial hesitation was beginning to fade. The way she clutched the jade pendant, almost like a talisman, seemed to give her the strength to continue. "It's funny, you know," she began, fiddling with the bread in her thin fingers. "People look at me now as if I'm invisible. But there was a time when I was heard, respected." Lars leaned in attentively. He knew that listening was more than just a polite gesture, it was a way to restore humanity to someone who had been overlooked for so long. "I was a literature teacher," she continued, her eyes lighting up slightly at the memory. "I taught teenagers. They were so rebellious, but also so full of potential. I loved every second of it." She paused, the smile on her face gradually fading. "Until it all started to fall apart." Anya recounted how, after decades devoted to teaching, the school where she worked closed due to budget cuts. She lost not just her job, but also the community that had been part of her daily life. During that transition, her daughter, Elise, was her constant support. Elise was young, full of dreams, and worked as a nurse. The two of them lived together, sharing a small apartment in Utrecht. "Elise was my pride," Anya said, her voice trembling slightly. "She had such a big heart. She always said she wanted to help the world. But the world didn't help her. Lars felt the weight of her words. He could see that this was a wound Anya bore with great difficulty. "What happened?" he asked softly. "An accident," she replied, her voice barely audible. "A drunk driver. It happened so quickly. One moment, she was there, so full of life, and the next, Anya stopped, pressing her lips together to hold back tears. Lars said nothing, but he leaned in slightly, a gesture of empathy that seemed to encourage her to continue. Elise's death was devastating for Anya. Without a job and now without her daughter, she endured months of emotional and financial struggles. Bills piled up. Soon, the apartment she had shared with Elise was repossessed by creditors. "I never imagined it would end like this," she said, staring at her trembling hands. "One day, I had a home, a family, a purpose. The next day, it was all gone." Lars tried to process everything he'd heard. It wasn't just the sadness of the story that moved him, but the way Anya told it, with a mix of resignation and resilience. Despite everything, she had somehow remained standing. "And the pendant?" he asked, shifting the tone, hoping to lighten the emotional weight. Anya held the small jade stone between her fingers, its green glow catching the bakery's light. "It was my mother's. She passed it to me when I got married, saying it brought luck." Anya smiled briefly, a melancholy smile. "I guess the luck ran out at some point. But I could never part with it. It's like she's still with me, you know?" Lars nodded. There was something about the way she spoke of the pendant that unsettled him. The memory of his own mother and her similar necklace kept surfacing in his mind. "My mother had a necklace like that too," he said, almost absent-mindedly. "It was identical, I think. She wore it all the time, right until the end." Anya raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised. "Really? It's an old piece. You don't see it often." "Maybe it's just a coincidence," Lars said, trying to dismiss what was beginning to feel like a deeper connection than he had expected. Yet, something told him it wasn't just a coincidence. He studied Anya's face again, as if searching for something that might confirm his growing suspicions. "Anya, have you ever thought about having a home again?" Lars asked suddenly, changing the subject. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "A home? That's a luxury for someone like me. For years, no one has treated me like you're treating me now. This is already more than I ever expected." Lars frowned. He couldn't accept her resignation. Something stirred within him. "Maybe it's time to change that," he said with quiet determination. Anya looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm not sure yet," he replied, his mind already formulating a plan. "But we'll figure it out together." As Lars paid for the meal, he already knew that meeting Anya wasn't a coincidence. He felt compelled to do more for her. And though he didn't yet know where this would lead, he was ready to find out. The biting cold of Utrecht made Anya's steps hesitant as she crossed the uneven pavement. Her worn-out coat felt more like a burden on her slouched shoulders than a shield against the piercing wind. Her nearly numb fingers clutched a few coins she'd counted over and over the night before, hoping they would be enough to buy a loaf of whole-grain bread. The bakery on the corner was famous in the neighborhood. Its display window showcased golden loaves covered in seeds and delicately decorated cakes that seemed untouched by time. Anya hesitated before stepping inside, as she often did everywhere she went. The warmth and comforting aroma inside contrasted starkly with her presence. She knew the eyes of customers and staff would follow her, but she had no choice. "I just need bread," she thought, swallowing the lump growing in her throat. The manager, Peter, stood behind the counter, tall and rigid, exuding an air of authority in every movement. When he spotted Anya, his eyes narrowed, and he adjusted his apron as though preparing for trouble. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone sharp enough to turn a few heads. "A loaf of whole-grain bread, please." Anya placed her coins on the counter, keeping her gaze low. Peter sighed theatrically, eyeing the coins and then Anya, as if to highlight the absurdity of the scene. "Do you think this is a charity?" He picked up the coins, counting them quickly. "This isn't even half the price." "I just need one," Anya began, but he cut her off. I don't want to hear excuses. Peter barked, raising his voice. He grabbed the loaf she had pointed at and, with a dramatic gesture, tossed it into the bin behind the counter. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Some customers averted their gazes, feigning interest in the displays. Others stared at Peter in disbelief, but no one said a word. Anya stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly, unsure whether to apologize or leave. Then a firm voice broke through the tension. That was unnecessary and cruel. Lars, a man in his early 30s with a confident stance, stepped forward. He held a bag of fresh bread and wore an expression that balanced indignation and compassion. Peter, what are you doing? Throwing food away in front of someone who clearly needs it? Lars asked, fixing the manager with a sharp look. It's none of your business, Lars, Peter replied, trying to maintain authority, though his voice had lost some of its edge. It's everyone's business. Lars glanced around, silently rallying the other customers. A few nodded subtly. Without waiting for further debate, Lars pulled out his wallet and approached the counter. He placed a generous note in front of Peter. I'll have a cheese sandwich and pea soup, please. Quickly. Peter hesitated but complied, preparing the order in silence. Meanwhile, Lars turned to Anya, who still appeared stunned. Sit with me, he said, his voice gentle but leaving no room for refusal. She followed him to a nearby table by the window, feeling the weight of relieved eyes trailing behind. When the food arrived, Lars pushed the plate toward her with an encouraging smile. Don't worry about them. Eat, he said, pausing. And tell me your story. Anya hesitated for a moment, but Lars's kindness was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. As she took her first bite of bread, tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't just the gesture, it was the simple act of being treated like someone who mattered. As she ate, Lars noticed something intriguing. A jade green pendant hung around Anya's neck, catching the light with a subtle glow. There was something familiar about it, as though he'd seen it before. Leaning in slightly, his heart quickened without him realizing. That necklace, where did it come from? Anya's expression shifted, and the silence that followed made Lars uneasy. There was more to this story than he could have anticipated. Zorg voor Iedereen quickly became more than a community center, it transformed into a symbol of hope in Utrecht. The story of Anya and Lars's dedication spread like wildfire across social media and local newspapers, inspiring others to follow their example. Lars began receiving calls from nearby cities, where organizations and ordinary people expressed interest in replicating the initiative. For Anya, the center was not just a place where she had rediscovered her voice, it was a home, a new reason to keep moving forward. Working alongside other volunteers gave her a sense of purpose and belonging. She led cooking workshops for participants, turning simple recipes into lessons in resilience and collaboration. When we cook, we learn that every ingredient, no matter how simple, plays an important role, she said with a serene smile. Just like each of us. The center's impact was visible in the lives it transformed. A young man named Omar, who had lost his job and was living in a shelter, found new employment with the center's support. A single mother, Ingrid, received career guidance and gained stability for herself and her children. Stories like these began to accumulate, proving that Lars's vision was deeply rooted in meaningful change. However, not everything was easy. As the project grew, new challenges emerged, the need for more resources, the difficulty of meeting rising demand, and occasional criticism from those skeptical of the initiative's sustainability. Lars faced each obstacle with the same determination that had driven him to help Anya in the first place. I always knew it would be hard, he often told Saskia. But if it were easy, someone else would have done it already. Even some local business owners who had initially resisted began to soften. One day, Peter, the bakery manager, visited the center, saying he wanted to better understand what Lars was doing. Though he maintained his characteristic dry tone, Lars saw it as a small victory. Maybe I misjudged, Peter admitted before leaving, offering no more than that. As the center continued to grow, Lars took time to reflect on the journey so far. On a quiet evening, walking through the now empty warehouse after a busy day, he noticed Anya sitting on one of the benches, gazing at her jade necklace. He approached quietly and sat beside her. You've been thinking a lot about that necklace, haven't you? He asked gently. Anya nodded, holding the pendant carefully between her fingers. You know, Lars, I don't think it was a coincidence that you noticed this that day in the bakery. Maybe this connected us somehow. Lars didn't know what to say. He still felt there was something inexplicable about their connection, but he decided to leave the answers for another time. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Maybe it wasn't. But what matters now is that you're here. And your story is helping so many others. Anya smiled, her eyes shining with a mix of emotion and gratitude. In the weeks that followed, Lars leveraged the success of the center to expand his vision. He began organizing community meetings to teach other neighborhoods and cities how to create their own support spaces. The message was clear: Zorg voor iedereen wasn't just a physical place, it was a movement that could spread far and wide. On the center's one-year anniversary, Lars organized a special event. People who had been helped by the project shared their stories on a makeshift stage, expressing their gratitude for the second chances they'd received. When Anya took the stage, the audience fell silent. Her story was the foundation of it all. No matter how much life knocks us down, she said with a steady voice, there's always someone willing to lend a hand. I'm proof of that. And now, it's my turn to be that hand for others. The applause was deafening. Lars watched from a distance, feeling the weight of his choices, but also the pride of everything they had accomplished. Saskia approached him, as she always did during emotional moments. You did it, Lars, she said. He shook his head. We did it. And the work isn't over. As the event wound down, Lars felt that something profound had shifted, not just for Anya, but for the entire community. Zorg voor iedereen was more than a center, it was proof that even in the hardest times, compassion and solidarity could create lasting change. And deep down, Lars knew this was only the first chapter of a much greater story.